This is On the Line, and I'm Eric Felton. India's public system for delivering food basics to the poor has been looted by corrupt politicians, according to an investigative report by Bloomberg News. Bloomberg says that more than $14 billion in food has been looted by corrupt politicians and criminal syndicates over the past decade in the state of Uttar Pradesh alone. Why are there malnourished Indians when government warehouses are full of food? I'll ask my guest. Joining us by phone from New Delhi, India, Mehul Srivastava, reporter at large for Bloomberg News. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Mehul, how is this public food distribution system supposed to work?
In a perfect world, the idea is supposed to be that the Indian government, the central government, will spend money buying, they buy wheat, they buy sugar, they buy rice, and they buy kerosene, and they will distribute it to the states by the number of poor people they have in the states. And the people in the state would have been issued a ration card, and they'd be able to go to local shops. There's about 400,000 of these shops called fair price shops. And when they get there, they'd have a quota, and they should be able to receive their monthly quota of wheat or rice or sugar at highly subsidized prices, depending on whether they're poor or they're extremely poor, whether they're a widow or whether they've lost land or it's been a tragedy in their family, for as low as a couple of cents a kilo.
And this had been put together after there had been shortages of food, but now there are been bumper crops that have left government warehouses groaning with huge amounts of grain.
Yeah, they set this up in 1965. There'd been a couple of failed monsoons, and there'd been mini famines in different parts of the country. So the government decided it'd be good for them to have these buffer stocks, maybe keep about 20 or 30 million metric tons of food handy in case there were any other failures in the drought, failures in the monsoons. But what happened over time is that as India has grown more and more food, the Indian government has purchased more and more food because these minimum support prices keep the farmers happy. So right now you have warehouses that are carrying far more than India needs in terms of a buffer. And I think about 80 million metric tons right now, when storage capacity is only in the 40 or 50 million metric ton.
The World Bank says that less than half the food put into the system actually reaches the households it's meant for.
Yes, I mean, since it's such a vast system and spread across so many states, it's always difficult to have averages that hold true. But there are some states in India where corruption is more prevalent. And in a state like Uttar Pradesh, which is the most populous state in the country, it's got about 180 million people, the World Bank thinks about 41% of the food actually reached people, which means 60% somewhere along the way just leaked out through corruption, through wastage, through spillage. So we went down to Uttar Pradesh, me and a colleague, Andrew McCaskill, because we wanted to figure out exactly what had been going on. And in that specific state, there'd been a mafia that had been set up over time that allowed people to pick up food from government warehouses at subsidized prices, but instead of passing them on to the people who deserved the food, they would sell it in the open market. That allowed them to make profits of millions of dollars for individual districts and billions of dollars for the entire state. Our estimate is about $14.5 billion over 10 years was looted.
And these are often political players of some sort, you have found.
And they are almost always political players, because in these remote districts, politicians and corrupt police officers and corrupt government officials will collude to look the other way. In fact, in 2004, when it first became clear that in a few districts of UP, which is what we call Uttar Pradesh, was having this scam, it was only because a single honest district magistrate decided to find out where all the missing rice and wheat was going.
And you write in your article about a number of different investigations that finally had been launched into this at various levels of government, and yet there hasn't been a lot to show for all of these various investigations. How has that played out?
This seems like the most investigated and least prosecuted crime in the country. We've had at least 5 investigations, including the Central Bureau of Investigation, which is India's federal anti-graft agency, kind of like the FBI in the U.S., I suppose. And they've had years to look into this. Now, some of them are understaffed, agreeably, but there are also the state police, which are, in a way, beholden to what the state government is up to. So the bureaucracy, the corruption, the lack of money, the mismanagement has meant that so far, while we know that the food has been stolen, and there's names out there of people who possibly stole it, only one senior politician has actually been indicted, and then he passed away of a heart attack before he could be tried. And that's it. There's been no major prosecutions.
And is there frustration about this in the population at large?
You know, when it first came to light over here in India, it was never quite clear exactly how large the scam could be. Numbers were in a couple hundred million to a couple of billion to 14 billion, which is what we have. And it's still not clear how much food has been looted over time. People are angry. People are upset, but it's one of many different corruption scandals that plague India. This one just kind of, it hits people hard because it involves food for poor people. So while there is some anger, it's mitigated by the fact that there's other corruption scandals that involve bigger sums of money and go over many years that involve even more political parties in a large part of the country.
Why has India had so much trouble trying to crack down on corruption?
You know, some of it is basically the chaos of a young democracy we've always felt, but it's also the fact that the government just doesn't spend enough money in fighting graft. I remember looking at a study once that showed that Hong Kong, for instance, spent about $11 a citizen in fighting corruption. India would spend about 22 cents in fighting corruption per citizen. The country is vast. Uttar Pradesh is a vast state. It's difficult to police, for instance. There are entire districts of hundreds of thousands of people that are overseen by maybe 20 or 30 district officials. There are various reasons, but to fight them all, essentially, you need to invest a lot more in fighting graft than India's ever done.
And is there much consideration given to the idea that perhaps if you set up a system that is at risk of corruption and then you try to police it after the fact, perhaps there would be a better way of trying to change the way the system is set up in the first place so that it doesn't encourage graft?
You know, this is true. The food secretary for the state of Uttar Pradesh, when I interviewed him, said exactly the same thing. The system is set up in such a way that it depends upon the honesty of the participants. You know, for instance, the fair price shop owners, the ones who are the last part of the food chain that delivers the rice to the people, are supposed to work on a no-profit, no-loss basis. It just creates opportunities for people to leak and to be honest and not do it. Well, that doesn't work. It doesn't work anywhere in the world, and it definitely didn't work in India in this case. In Tamil Nadu, a state in southern India, which is not as underdeveloped as UP is, they've come up with better systems where people use fingerprints rather than booklets, and now they can hear for themselves rather than being forced to try and read if they're literate exactly what their quotas are. And leakage in that state, theft, leakage is it's code for theft, has dropped to about 7%. So there are technological ways to try and avoid this kind of large-scale looting.
And it seems that the corruption issue has become a political force of some sort, to some extent in India, with the Anna Hazare movement, and I see that they've announced that they may be trying to form a new political party built around anti-corruption.
Around the time that these scams all came to light, there's a food scam which we've written about, and there's been a scam involving coal allotments, there's a scam involving airwaves. It almost reached a point where the middle class in India was fed up. Anna Hazare is part of a larger movement that's not very well understood, but is strongly anti-graft. And that's something that caught the fancy of a large number of middle class in India. Now, the idea to form a political party, it's not clear how well that'll work out, and whether or not he'll have any heft in a parliament that's got 535 people. But it is definitely a symbol that people are frustrated, people are angry, and people are looking at different alternatives to try and put pressure on national and state governments to try and curb down on corruption.
What are the prospects for a party? I guess traditionally in India, parties have been built around religion or caste or region, and this would be something new to have a party built around a political movement.
From what we've seen of the Anna Hazare movement, it seems a lot more fragmented than you'd have to have a successful political revolution of any sort. You could perhaps win a few seats in parliament, but that's irrelevant when you have coalition governments that require 200-300 people to form a government. But it would be a symbolic step. to have somebody like Anna Hazare who could then, or somebody else who's anti-corruption and is very, very well versed in the processes of prosecuting graft, including some of the lawyers that are on his team, to be given the opportunity to at least deliver some oversight.
Well, I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today. Mehul Srivastava is a reporter at large for Bloomberg News in New Delhi, India. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Eric.
Before we go, I'd like to invite you to send us your questions or comments. You can reach us through our website at www.voanews.com/ontheline. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you'll join us again next week for On the Line.